to today's webinar of the Campus CoGenerate Affinity Network on piloting and experimenting. So today's webinar is co-hosted by myself, Alyssa Melby, she, her. I'm the director of the Svoboda Center for Civic Engagement at St. Olaf College, which is located in Northfield, Minnesota. And I'm here with my illustrious co-host.
I'm Markia. Hi, everyone. It's really good to see you. I'm a PhD student at Morgan State University studying education, but I also work at Johns Hopkins University Center for Social Concern, focused on civic and community engagement in Baltimore. So today's journey, we're going to go through three objectives. So first, we kind of want to look at taking a co-generational eye to enhance programs that are already on our campuses or in our communities. So looking through how we can take what exists and make it co-generational. We're going to explore some specific examples of low-lift co-generational activities with our speakers, Kathy and Corey, today. So kind of looking how we can incorporate co-generation in both academic pursuits on campus or with community partners off campus. And then finally, we're going to identify potential stakeholders to collaborate with to innovate on a small scale. So who already exists in our communities that we can work with to attain our goals?
Thanks, Markia. So this is the third of 6 webinar series for the Affinity Network. And we've been starting each webinar with some grounding principles for why we're all here together and interested in this work. So first off, raise your hand or give an emoji reaction if it's your first time here at a webinar. Welcome. Yay! There is a couple. Give a thumbs up or an emoji or raise your hand if you are back to one of our webinars in the Affinity group. Yay! Excellent. So glad. Welcome or welcome back to the Affinity. In the chat, I'd now like to invite you to also share, are you CoGen curious? Meaning like you feel like you're a total newbie to this work? Are you a CoGen connector where you're doing some things, but maybe it's fragmented or it's not sustained at this point? Or are you a CoGen champion? You've got sustained engagement happening. There's a core commitment for you and or your university where you're at. So go ahead and put that in the chat. Cool. All right. So next, with our grounding principles, we really want to invite you to make these offerings in the Affinity Network work for you. So ideas that you're hearing, theories, stuff that's shared, adapt it, jump off and go, however it might be useful for you in your particular context. We also need co-conspirators in this work. So please share this information with others, the webinar invites, the materials that we've shared. Spread the word. And then we also want to just remind ourselves that small innovations are still innovations, right? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. These changes that we made that weren't huge, didn't cost a lot of money, but we're still moving this work forward. And so with that, that goes directly to our theory of change, which is that small innovations that we're each doing will collectively ripple into this like tsunami of co-generational work happening in our communities. So with that, again, our why and our collective commitment. So again, we just kind of want to ground ourselves in our why as we work through today. So our collective compact that we've tried out for this year as a group is as follows. And again, please find your favorite reaction emoji in Zoom. And after each statement, go ahead and give a thumbs up, a heart, little celebration thingy. I can't remember what it's called right now. Whatever speaks to you at the moment after each statement. So we are committed to imagining a co-generative future. Let me see those reactions. Yay. Cool. I am committed to innovation, beginning where I, my institution, and my community is at. We are committed to movement. Excellent. And then the final thing that we're doing as an affinity network, again, thinking about those small innovations, is considering what is a faithful next step that every single person can take in between the webinars to help move this work forward. So if you've been here before, we asked you to think about a faithful next step that you could do in between that webinar and this one. So if you were here and you've done a faithful next step, go ahead and put them in the chat. And without further ado, we would love to turn it over to our two special guests today. First, starting with Kathy Techmeyer-Pack, Professor of Political Science and Asian Studies, also at St. Olaf College, whom I have the privilege of working with. And then following Kathy will be Corey Smothers, Partnership and Recruitment for Thread. So Kathy, I'll go ahead and start it with you.
Always the audio, always the unmuting. Okay, so glad to be here and to know about all the people who are doing this exciting work. I want to tell you about a project that is just wrapping up, actually just wrapped up on Monday evening, that is tied to a class that I teach for our first year seminar program. So that's where I would start with. Where did the idea for my CoGenerate project come from? Was in a routine checkup meeting with Alyssa. So this is a first year seminar that I teach that is titled Imagining Democracies Globally. And it provides students with college knowledge when they first arrive on campus, giving them connections and understanding resources and starting to reflect on themselves. And then substantively, it's a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary take on democracy and democratization around the world. And last year, working with our academic civic engagement program and therefore with Alyssa, we did get out the vote work. It was a big success. Happy to have it in the first year seminar. And when we sat down to debrief and look ahead for this year, Alyssa shared her involvement in this network, and we were talking through some other ideas I had about having my students paired with another part of campus that was bringing in speakers about strengthening democracy. And one thing led to another. And before you know it, we had a project that was going to fit in with this CoGenerate set of ideas. What did I need to get involved? So that's slide 7, Alyssa. What you'll see here is just that I just needed to use the resources I was already engaged in. So you see a picture of our first year seminar, a picture of my syllabus. These are things I was going to do anyway. I'm committed to doing every year. I really like teaching first years, and I always like to have some kind of outreach if I can. So it was just a question of chatting with Alyssa, learning about the connections she's already building, and talking with our partner in the organization on campus, the Institute for Shorthand, that was planning the Outside Speaker series, so that we could think about logistics and who to invite. On my side, I had to think about how to fit this in the class. I had some rearranging to do in the syllabus, but that's sort of ordinary work. Eventually, the other thing we needed for this to happen was my students had to actually do some lifting, right? We had to get them engaged, involved. They went through training, and they had to go into it in good faith to facilitate conversations, because what we ended up designing was an outside speaker would come in, they would be giving some talk about how to strengthen democracy, and my students were tasked with hosting an event right after the talk happened. And so I guess that's the next slide, Alyssa. Slide 8. So you can see here, this is a poster that I made for one of the events that we shared with community partners. We had really good timing. This was a speaker I had asked for. And then after we had her all booked to come to campus, she won a MacArthur Genius Award. So that was nice, made me look smart, I guess. But better still, it meant that our students had a chance and our community members had a chance to hear from somebody who's truly creative. Those of you at Hopkins might already know her. This is Professor Hari Han. And I had to write I wrote up an assignment and just the ordinary sort of professor things. So we recruited campus partners ahead of time. Alyssa took the step of introducing me and introducing the project to our off-campus partners, our community partners. I communicated with them. We worked together to train the students. So Alyssa came into my classroom with another colleague of ours, and we did a pre-training for them. I ran another session where I had them practice around a talk that was recorded that had happened elsewhere. So we scaffolded into the workshop. We had a sign-up system. we shared the information. And I also asked the students to invite friends of theirs to be sure that we had A, enough people, since this was the first time. We weren't sure how many folks would show up from the community, but B, to really lean into the interdisciplinarity and the intergenerational work to get people from so many different backgrounds. So we did it 3 times. I guess the next question, the slides are just sort of background. I'm just going to talk through a few more things about where to go from here. But before I do that, I just want to tell you about the feedback that I got. 2 kinds of feedback. After every discussion happened, and the discussions were tagged with, you're listening to this eminent person come in and talk about strengthening democracy. How do you make sense of this in your own life? Right? So that was the conversation, and the students would do a little warm-up exercise, and then they would have a conversation. They ran for an hour. And at the end of each of those exercises, I had just simple little pieces of paper that looked, these are the ones that aren't filled out, but just this simple 3 questions, how did it go? Do you have feedback for the student facilitators? And then would you recommend participating in a dialogue like this to others? And so that's one of the ways I captured feedback. And that was delightful to read. The responses I got from people who attended, almost everybody emphasized they enjoyed having access to additional perspectives around questions of how to strengthen democracy. Almost everybody agreed that they thought it was informative and fun, that the students helped them feel comfortable, that the small groups were really important. And then I think what my political science heart was probably happiest of all about was that so many people raised points about that they thought this really mattered for democracy. So people wrote things like, yes, we need to hear from the community, or it's really important to build communities necessary to invoke political change because it makes you feel less alone. It's always good to talk about political issues, and it's so good to see and hear college students engaged with issues of democracy. So that was really exciting. And then the other form of feedback where I caught the story of what we had done was I asked the students to do a little 1-page reflection memo. They had written about how they felt about political discussion before we went into this. And when Alyssa and I were brainstorming how this would all work, she's like, are you sure this is okay for first semester? Students, aren't they going to be intimidated? And I'm like, yeah, they're probably going to be intimidated, but we got them. We're going to train them for this. We're going to support them. We're going to make it feel low stakes. And then we're going to check in and see how it was. And in fact, she was right. They were pretty intimidated ahead of time. And the memos that they've written back to me are glowing, full of beautiful examples of why they feel empowered in a new way. So I want to share just a few more with you. After facilitating a political discussion, I feel more confident in my ability to have any type of political discussion. And looking back at what I wrote earlier in the semester, I'd answer it differently now. Before that, I said I didn't have feelings about political discussions and I didn't go out of my way to seek them. But after leading one, I realized that these political dialogues can be very engaging and meaningful when done correctly. Definitely gave me a chance to listen more deeply and understand how people form their beliefs, which is something I think we are lacking in this world. I could sit and just read these to you for an hour, but time doesn't allow. But suffice it to say that that turned out better than I would have even dared to hope. So even after one of these sessions had happened back in October, I was already starting to think, oh my gosh, what are we going to do next? This can't just be a one-off. This should be a feature of this first-year seminar going forward. So then the last thing that I guess I'd touch on in my time speaking is to say, what do I see as opportunities for moving forward and scaling up? I think it might be possible. This comes from some of the feedback with students. It might be possible to involve some of our off-campus guests to be engaged in the class earlier in the semester and to even do some of the same reading students were doing to prepare for the guest speakers. It could be possible to even set up a way for people to audit the class if they wanted to. That's a time commitment that I'm not sure many people would make, but perhaps they would. And then I'm also really curious if we can think about evening events so that we can have people who are still working, not just folks who are retired. The events we hung this on, we're all set for 3:30 in the afternoon with students in mind, which is great and worked pretty well for retired community members. But we wanted, for example, to involve some of our alumni who are in the broader region who we expected to be interested, but anybody who's working 3:30 in the afternoon is a pretty tough call. So I want to think a little more about that. And that's what I think the next steps will be for us as we think about building it out. I will just add with one last piece of feedback from a community member who joined that said, keep what you're doing. This was fantastic. More, please. So it really was a great joy. And I'm excited to see what comes next. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Really appreciate you sharing about that. All right, next up, we're going to hear from Corey.
Hi everyone. I apologize if my voice is going in and out. I lost it over the weekend and we're still regrouping. But my name's Corey Smothers. I am a partnership and recruitment manager for Thread. And just a little bit about Thread. We're a Baltimore-based nonprofit. We've been around for about 22 years, but I think one of the incredible things about Thread that kind of ties into what we're speaking about today is that Thread actually came about just from like the idea of the loneliness epidemic. Our founder and CEO was new to Baltimore, and she was a student at Hopkins, both the undergraduate campus and the biomedical engineering program for after undergraduate. And she kind of just looked around and said, I really don't know if I see my people here, and I want to find my people somewhere. So that just formed into this beautiful organization that's really focused on creating relationships and creating bi-directional relationships, as well as just seeing growth over time. Next slide, please. So, a little bit about us and what we really focus in on just to lay that foundation for you. So, we work with high school students. We start working with them during their freshman year, and we work with the high school students that are in the lowest 25% of the freshman class. We are pretty strict with that. We don't take referrals. We are only at 7 high schools in Baltimore. So, we're pretty focused within the groups that we work with. But as long as they're within that bottom 25% of their class, what we do is we enroll them into Thread, and we think of Thread more as a community than we do as a program. We also commit to each of these young people for 10 years. So we never unenroll anyone. We have young people that have become incarcerated, have passed away, have stayed through those 10 years, and then gone on to become staff at Thread or just come back and join in on the Thread community. So we create those relationships and, take those bonds very seriously and put a lot of love and energy into them. And then the other thing that we work to do is we're looking to build trust and transformational relationships because our goal is to help our young people become self-efficient. We're not trying to just say, what is the barrier and how can we, give you the answer to get through it? What is the barrier? What's our next step? What's the questions we ask on how to kind of figure out where do we go from here? How do we move through this barrier? So the goal is that it's not a to and through college community. It's just how can we help you to be self-efficient? What are your goals in life, whether it is college or maybe it's becoming a mechanic or going to nursing school or whatever that looks like for our young people. Next slide, please. But I know specifically for this panel, what I really did want to focus on was how we actually set up our Thread family, because it's a very unique design in terms that it's not peer-to-peer. So what we really focus in on is creating relationships across lines of difference. So you can kind of see the model here. I know it looks very confusing, but essentially each little pod on the diagram is a young person paired up with 2 to 3 volunteers. And we do really try to diversify those volunteers. We do have a lot of volunteers that are actually current Hopkins students, but then we have volunteers that, work at a bank downtown. We have volunteers that are retired. We have volunteers that are medical students. We have a very, very diverse group of volunteers to really focus in on, just these young people and not only hoping to help the young people that they're connected with, but also, I work with a lot of med school students. I work with JHMI a lot. That's kind of my community that I'm focused in on. And a lot of our med school students are not from Baltimore. They're new to the city. They might even be new to the country. Kind of like our founder and our CEO, Sarah, they might not have found their people yet. So they're, trying to kind of branch out. And the great thing that I've always let them know is that, while you're maybe going to help your young person with tutoring or just be a listening ear for them, maybe you both have a Saturday morning free and you don't know what to do on your Saturday mornings because you don't know the city, and your young person says, I love coffee. This is my favorite coffee shop in the city. You and I are going to go together and grab a coffee, and you're going to, maybe this becomes your new favorite coffee shop. Or they don't know about the Fells Point Farmers Market that happens every Saturday morning, or just whatever the case may be. They're really able to create something that goes both ways versus just volunteering and giving and giving and giving to the organization. But because of that, the way that we have this like family style model of volunteering set up, it allows people to really come together in different capacities. We create thread spaces that we like to call them for our volunteers and our young people to get together. But at the same time, once a month, we actually offer a time for just our volunteers to get together. Our young people are not involved. Maybe we do talk a little bit about barriers we might be facing with our young people, but then we also just do bridging and bonding activities for our volunteers so that they can get to know one another. Maybe one person lives on one side of the city and another person lives on the other side, and they're learning new things about each other and learning new things about the city and getting suggestions on, which way is up, once they're kind of navigating this new world. So just because of that, we've seen a lot of great relationships fostered, not only just between a young person and a volunteer, regardless of their age, but also between different volunteers coming together and, hanging out and getting into different spaces together. You can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about our impact overall as well. So again, we've been around for about 22 years. So we've actually seen a couple cohorts of that, 10-year commitment actually flow through Thread already. We do have actually people on staff. Our managing director, which is pretty much my boss's boss, is actually from the first Thread cohort. So we see a lot of growth with people finding new paths and navigating the world differently. So again, we make 100% of our students remain a part of Thread. We never unenroll a student. But we also see that what a lot of people might not know is that for a high school student that's in Baltimore City and in the bottom 25th percent of their class, at that point in time, they have about a 6% chance of going on to graduate high school. So once they're enrolled in Thread community, we've seen that go from 6% to 65%. And that's always going to look different for everybody because you can even say here it says they're graduating within 6 years. Not everybody's path is going to be, straight along what the norm is. So for some of our students, they do graduate in 4 years, but some of them go a different route and they graduate in 5 years or 6 years, or maybe 8 years down the line, they come back and get their GED. And then on top of that, we have had 46% of our Thread young people go on to do either a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree and then go on to, different type of schooling. But just overall, it's been incredible to see that, they take that 6% and they up it to 65, and on top of that, another 46% of those young people going on to college, which a lot of them did not feel was a possibility or think, was going to be within their cards of things that they were going to be able to do. And you can go on to the next slide. The last thing that I will just say is that Thread, I know for me personally, have been able to build a really great community with people that I, never knew existed, and learning, new neighborhoods in Baltimore. And one thing that I've really valued as well is we offer a lot of different things, whether it's someone looking to become a volunteer or someone looking to bring us in, to host a lunch and learn, which are things that we do a lot. We offer a great variety of bridging and bonding activities that we do with very diverse groups of people. And that's something that, I've done a lot of public speaking for other organizations where I've worked, but that was something that just the different types of activities that they offer and the way that people really kind of dive into them and are very open to them. It takes people like I did a lunch and learn for BG&E, and their employees, they work together. They don't see each other much outside of the workplace, but just during that bonding activity that we did during our lunch and learn, they actually got to know each other a lot better and on a different level and kind of bridge the gap even within their coworkers that they didn't know that there was a gap to be bridged. So it's a really, really cool thing to see come to light, when we're able to offer that and kind of host that and guide people through that. But if there's any questions or interests in hosting something yourself, I would love to connect with you about that. And if there's any questions I can answer, I'm available to do that as well.
I think that, well, before I go on to this next session, do we have time for quick questions? We can give about 5 minutes for questions if anyone has anything they want to ask Kathy or Corey about either of their programs.
Oh, I was going to ask if Corey could talk a little bit more about what are some of the specific activities that happen in the groups? What are the things that you're doing?
So we're doing, and let me see if I can actually just pull this up here so I can give you more of a bigger list of things. But we almost call that like a menu of thread activities, so to speak. And some of those activities include, one that I really enjoy is like we have people get into small groups, whether it's 2 or 3 people, and we go through a progression of questions, but the questions kind of get more and more deep and they kind of force you to open up a little bit and reflect back on yourself and then also really put into practice like strict active listening. So in terms of like if I'm doing the activity and Joanne, you're my partner, I'm going to be listening to your response, but then I'm going to reflect back what I'm hearing you say and the biggest points that I'm taking away from it. And it's about a 5 to 7 minute conversation that we're having. So there might be things that you had glossed over but had mentioned, but for some reason, me being the listener, I really grabbed onto those things. And when I'm reflecting back, that creates more space to kind of delve into those topics a little bit deeper as well.
So do you focus on any kind of literacy or skill development as well, or is it more on the interaction, emotional development side?
It's a combination of all of the above, especially with our young people. We actually host spaces for them both at their high school and, of course, with that 10-year commitment we're making. A lot of our young people are not in high school anymore, so we actually host hours at our office as well on Wednesday afternoons. And during those spaces for our young people, we welcome outside speakers to come in, and maybe we have one room that's focused on more of that literacy like you were speaking about, or maybe more of emotional connection. And then maybe there's another room where they're, getting their resume together and figuring that out. And then we also have one where some of our staff offer up their cars because some of our young people don't have a license and they're practice driving to get their learner's permit and then their license. So we kind of go through like the full scope of life. And when we think about our relationships that our volunteers have with their young people, again, it's not that peer-to-peer focus and it's not just focused on school or graduating high school. It's more so kind of just going through life together and navigating the different things that do come up.
Anyone else have any questions? Okay. If your questions do come up, feel free to put them in the chat. And there will be more time for us to discuss later in small groups. So we talked about last time, we talked about asset mapping, but I do understand that not everyone was present for that. And so we just kind of wanted to do a crash course of asset mapping to get the creative juices flowing and try to start thinking about ideas for potential pilots or experiments you could consider within your own context, right? So, crash course. One, what spaces already exist that are multi-generational in your communities? That could be on your campus, that could be in your city, it could be academic, co-curricular, you name it. But what do you know that already exists? The second are what spaces or programs have open boundaries of participation. And the third are who's involved. Who are some people that are in it that you know that you could connect with, whether that's the director of a center or staff, or in cases like Thread, maybe you know someone who volunteers or works closely with a community partner. So we're going to keep these three questions in mind as I go through these next practices, right? So I'm going to ask you to get a pen and paper, or maybe you have something that you can type on, some notes. But I'm going to go through 6 practices of intergenerational engagement. This is from Pearson Emerson's 2023 paper, where they talk about the power and promise of intergenerational collaboration. So there are 6 practices. I'm going to read off each one. And after I read it and kind of define what that is, what I'm going to ask you to do is take about 20 to 30 seconds to jot down what comes to mind, what already exists, what are the spaces and programs that have open boundaries, and who are some people you could connect with around this particular practice. Okay? So I'm going to go one by one. There's going to be some silence after each one because I want to give you time to jot down ideas. Silence is okay. And then after all of this is said and done, we're going to get in small groups and kind of brainstorm together what are some places we could start. All right. So the crash course questions are on the side, and I'll read through these practices with you. So the first practice that Pierce and Emerson talk about is connecting. And this all exists on a spectrum, right? These 6 practices. Connecting is like the foundation. So what are some spaces and who can you connect with around intergenerational friendships? This is looking like events or programs that are intentionally established for people to just talk to each other. Sharing space for social purposes, sharing stories, just caring for one another. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about where that exists on your campus community and who are some people you could connect with related to this practice. The next practice is co-working. I'm sure we're all familiar with this one. It's just more than one generation working on or near campus with and for one another. This could exist in the office. This could exist in a classroom. But the dynamics of co-working just include working with each other, typically employed by a third party. So where on campus or in your communities do you see this? And who specifically could you work with on a program that involves co-working? The third practice is coaching. And so this could take many, many different functions. Mentoring, typically funded to meet the needs of a given population. It preps students to enter the workforce. So you could think of internship opportunities, teaching assistantships, research assistantships, spaces where people are learning from one another or teaching each other. Where might that exist and who might you work with in your campus or on your communities? Okay. So on the next slide, we'll go through the next 3, but I wanna mention a feature of the first 3 that comes to mind when I talk about them. Those things are pretty frequent. We run into those things a lot on campuses and in our communities. These next 3, I think, will become increasingly, maybe not difficult, but they're fewer and far between in our communities. So co-learning is the next one. This is more than one generation learning together in a shared classroom or space, typically led or taught by a third party. So they're learning alongside each other, growing together. I think the first thing that comes to mind to a lot of us would be a traditional classroom setting, which is fine. As we learned from Kathy, this is actually a space where a lot of that co-generational work can happen. I do also want to implore you to think non-traditionally. Where else does co-learning take place? So what spaces do you know that already exist, and who might you connect with to start a project in this area? Next, we have collaborating. So sharing knowledge or resources, whether that's funding or people, with one another regarding a problem or situation specific to the participants. Dynamics of collaboration include inspiring one another, supporting each other, stepping aside to allow the other to shine. Again, typically on a project. So where do you see generations coming together on campus or in your community to work together in this particular way? And then last but not least, we have cogeneration, which obviously we are very interested in as CoGenerate. This is what we aim for, is working together with a common purpose to address a problem broader than those participating, leveraging campus resources. So this is really focusing on that bi-directional reciprocity that Corey was talking about, innovating together, creating something new together to address social challenges, that sort of thing. So sharing responsibility, spaces, and purpose. Where on campus or in your communities do you see that happening, and who are some people you could contact to work on that together? All right. So hopefully that got the gears turning in your head a little bit, hearing from Corey and Kathy about things happening on campus or in the community, and then thinking through where on campus and in your community you're seeing some of these practices. We're going to break out into small groups, and we're going to discuss together for about 10 minutes or so. And we want you to go through these 3 questions. So what's one low lift experiment you could try in your context? And again, we don't want to talk about like creating something brand new. I know that people are worried sometimes about funding or time, but what already exists, what simple structures exist that you can be a part of in your context? Who might you engage with? Did you identify certain centers or certain people who could help you? And then at what level of intergenerational practice would you start? Remembering that, again, this is a spectrum, right? Connecting being the foundation of just getting people in a room to cogeneration, where people are coming together and innovating and creating solutions to big problems. So, where are you starting on that spectrum? And what do you want to move toward? Okay. Alyssa put the questions in the chat so that you can reference them when you're in your small groups. So we invite you to talk to each other about what you've discovered, like what's going on in your campus and what are you thinking about? And hopefully you can bounce some ideas off of each other. And then we'll come back and share some things. Daniel has also put a Google Doc in the chat where you can take notes because we'd love to see what you talk about. Welcome back, everyone. I was trying to keep up with the notes. I'm curious if anyone has anything that they wanted to share about ideas that they're having or anything that they've been thinking about based on what they heard in the chats earlier or the intergenerational practices that were shared.
Hi, Markia.
Hi, Nicole.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. So, yeah, I just, I really enjoyed hearing them tell us about what they were doing. And this is just, I've been taking notes because these ideas are just flooding in. So, this is great. And I made a really great connection yesterday. And I think it's going to be helpful. And I like the way, Corey had talked about the ways that her organization is building on sustainability,
Mm.
so that was just amazing there. But I was just speaking with Rabbi Angel, and one of the things that they have done over there is they've got students and people in the community, and they're doing like films. So they'll have, the film and they'll both give their perspectives, and it's all about relationship building. And I thought, well, that's kind of universal. Films are universal. And then the lunch and learn. So I don't know. I'm just so excited. It was, yes, that's what I have.
That's great. Yeah, I love the idea of finding community partners. I mean, obviously I'm biased, right? I
Yes.
work in a community engagement center. But there's so much work that's already being done in community that's creative and artistic that we can join as opposed to building our own program. So it's great that you're able to
Yes.
identify some of that.
Yes. I've got my build with the community right here on my paper. I am, whoa. Full speed ahead.
Sweet. That's great.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Like, what are some other ideas that are coming up for you?
Marquia, I can share. My name's Craig Berger. I'm from Kent State University in Ohio. So one of the things that I mentioned with our group is we back in 2019, 2020 had something going really well, and then the pandemic disrupted it, and then we're trying to recover the momentum. But we operate a Flash is Fighting Hunger food security initiative in our community. So we recover food through volunteer assistance. We then repurpose that food and get it out to those who need it in our community. And we have a senior housing facility located right off campus called Kentway Apartments. It's subsidized housing for seniors or for those aged 55 and above. And we had a program where we would bring a meal that students would prepare on campus. We would bring it every week, and we would have dinner with those residents. And it was something they looked forward to every week. Um, and then it just sort of dissipated out with the pandemic because we were not allowed to be there. But it got me thinking, this conversation got me thinking about that was primarily connecting, but thinking about all the ways that if, we get back to that spot, things that we could do to build off of that. So whether it was making it more intentional by setting up coaching and mentorship relationships with those connections that we're forming, or whether it's figuring out ways to co-learn together, co-generate, identify issues that are external to both places in the community, and really try to team up and work together on solving a shared problem in our community. To me, that would I wish I could go back in time and really start that process before the pandemic, but now really trying to think about how do we recover that momentum and then build from there.
Agreed. I think I'm going to see if there's a way to send out that article that we're referring to with those 6 intergenerational practices, just because those different dynamics that they name, and in the full chart, there are also examples. I think it's really helpful for the reasons you said, Craig, of like figuring out how can you pull elements from different practices to build upon what already exists to eventually get to something that's a bit more cogenerative. So we'll be sure to figure out how to send that over to you. Before we close up, I'm looking at the time. I also just want to say that, like, I appreciate all of your contributions to the conversation. And while there are people on our campuses and our communities that we've been focusing on, we are also a resource for each other. And so hopefully, if you've heard some good ideas or if you've made connections with folks here, we can all serve as partners in this work together, even beyond these meetings. So make sure that you keep people's contacts and reach out if you need anything. I'm also very interested in having these conversations with you all too. So
Great. All right, I'm going to share my screen for just a few more things. So at the end of each webinar, we are returning to our collective compact as an affinity network here. And just like at the beginning, I asked you, maybe for those of you who are returning, what's a faithful next step that you completed? We're now circling and asking all of you today to think about what's a faithful next step that you might imagine doing between now and our next webinar, right? Maybe it's a person to contact. Maybe it's someone in this group to follow up with, like Rabbi Angel, you're on my list, right? So whatever that might be for you to keep this work moving forward, go ahead and put it in the chat. And while you're doing that,
we also want to let you know about the upcoming Affinity Network meetings. They happen monthly, always on Wednesdays. So the next one in January will be about telling the story and showing the value. So how do we measure and communicate the impact of cogenerational work? In February, we'll be talking about embedding it within our institutions and aligning them with institutional priorities. And then our last one in March will be about sustainability, as you mentioned, Nicole, and scaling. So what does it take to grow, sustain, and deepen that work over time? Because like you said, Craig, we don't want to lose momentum in case something comes up. How do we create plans around this stuff so that it stays within our institutions? And finally, we also have a poll. So Daniel's going to put the poll in the chat. There it is. So please fill this out. It helps us figure out where we are as a community in terms of cogeneration. Awesome. We got 100% participation. We appreciate that. This feedback is going to help us ensure that we make the next meetings as good as they can be for you and for the rest of our community. And finally, we just want to thank you for being here. I know that it's really close to winter break for all of us and the holidays, people are getting ready. So we do appreciate you taking time out of your day to be in community with us and brainstorm a bit. And we hope to see you next month in January.